Hi everyone, joining me today is Will Harris, who is no stranger to the IMOCA class, having sailed with Boris Herrmann in the Transat Jacques Vabre on the very boat, Sea Explorer. Will's a Figaro sailor and was one of the weather analysts during the Volvo Ocean race. So it's great to have experience along today. He's sat there in the green room, so let me just bring him in. Hey Will, how you doing?
Hi there, Conrad.
Good, good. Very well, thank you. What do you make of everything that's been going on in this last sort of few days?
Yeah, it's turned into quite an interesting race now. You don't really have one person you'd say who's outright gonna win the race at the moment. It's such a complicated system and a route down to the first of the three capes. And we're starting to see a bit of a strategy differences opening up amongst the boats. That second pack is all starting to divide, and they're all choosing their own options. And Charlie and Thomas having quite a good battle at the front. It's a bit of a shame about Thomas's news this morning of the foil.
Yeah,
That's
saw
going to
that.
be a bit of a setback to him, but hope we saw Alex have a similar issue last time, and he was still fighting the whole way around. So
Yeah,
no, very interesting race so far.
yeah. It's so you've done a fair few miles on Sea Explorer with Boris. What are these new generation boats like to sail, even compared to perhaps the boats the sort of older generation pre foilers.
Yeah, I was fairly lucky to get quite good insight into the sort of the differences between our mockers because obviously our boat now, Sea Explorer Yacht Club Monaco, was a 2016 generation boat. It was Gitana in the last Vendée Globe and had much smaller foils. Then last winter we upgraded it and we've effectively tripled the size of our foils and completely changed the structure and along with that all the electronics and new sensors and autopilots that come with it. So. Um, the first time we went sailing on the boat back in May, it was just a completely different experience. You suddenly find this whole different mode where the boat just takes off and flies out the water, and everything becomes about three times more uncomfortable. Feels about three times sketchier as well, but you really see that speed difference, and it's such a steep learning curve. They're a foiling IMOCA 60 compared to non-foiling is just has completely different modes, and trying
That's
to learn and yeah.
It's interesting you say that. So in previous Vendays, when we used to sort of compare people like Jean Le Cam and Mich Des, they had multi-hull experience and they were sailing their multis. They came back to sailing the IMOCA 60s, and you kind of generally felt that this was just so much easier for them, so much less stressful than sailing a full-on 60-foot multi. And so, do you think the work rate is that much harder now, so that there is a compromise in terms of your performance because it's much more stressful, and therefore other things perhaps suffer.
Yeah, in terms of the difficulty of sailing the boat, once you've kind of got used to how the modes have changed, and once you spend that time kind of understanding the best way to sail it, I think you've still got the same number of sail changes roughly, compared with an older generation boat. And it's just dealing with when it does get uncomfortable, when you're really foiling, and especially when there's waves as well, trying to manage the boat. That becomes a bit more stressful, admittedly, yeah. But I think the amount of work and the effort to keep it driving fast, it's fairly similar to compared to the other boats. It's just really that initial learning curve of how you're actually going to set it up, and it was really a kind of as we were learning about our new boat with the foils, it was really a case of try anything and everything because so more often than not, we'd found that if we had a theory of something that might work and a sail choice or something like that, it would actually be beneficial. There's always a chance that something might work. So
Yeah.
that was quite a big learning curve.
He Boris really strikes me as someone he takes everything in his stride. Really, he's very calm and laid back. It's certainly in the interviews that he's giving. Is that your impression of him?
Yeah, no, yeah, Boris is. It's very interesting to have sailed with him the last year because obviously I'm from the a Figaro racing background, sort of much shorter distance, a bit more intense as well. And Boris has been around the world three times already, and has done this for 20 odd years. And we work very differently on board the boat. And initially, I would sort of say Boris is too laid back in some senses, but really, that's it's come to show that actually it's really beneficial to sail like that on IMOCAs, and especially on a race that's 80 days. And it's really you really can't be pushing it too hard. You can't be pushing it 100% the whole time, and you really need to think about every little decision you make. And he definitely does that with his kind of calm and planned approach to everything. And in the lead up to the race, he's seeing him work on every single detail. He wanted to know absolutely everything on the boat that's going on, and really get down to the finest details of it to make sure he's got the most reliable boat going around the world. And there's times when things don't always go the way that you hope, and the way he manages to keep himself kind of calm and collected is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's certainly, he communicates very very well, and seems to be, very content, very very happy on board, and that, certainly in the long term will, I think, pay dividends. It's very easy in this race, in fact in any of these races, to kind of beat yourself up on a daily basis over decisions you've taken. And you're right, it's 80-day race, it's a long time. There's no point, being too cruel on yourself, particularly in these first few weeks.
Yeah, he's slowly chipping away at the miles. I think he was back in ninth or 10th, just having gone across the equator, and now sort of he's up to sort of sixth or seventh. We'll have to see how his strategy of sailing the shorter course is going to pay. But with Sam Davies and Louis Burton going diving south and west and trying to get into the good wind. But yes, so far the other thing as well is the boat we've had hardly any issues at all, nothing major or anything like that. So I think he's in a really good mindset with the fact that the boat's really held up. And with he's had the boat for 4 years now since it last did the Vendée Globe, and he's done so many miles, done more miles than any other skipper, I think, in the last 4 years. And the testing of the boat is really kind of nice to have that reliability in a race like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because obviously, we've seen some damage this week with Alex, and you mentioned Thomas and his damage to his foil. Do you think that will affect Boris at all? Do you think, in terms of his strategy going into the south, do you think he might back off a little bit, or stick to his game plan?
Yeah, probably the biggest one that gave Boris the most concern was when Corum's rig suddenly fell down. I think that was a bit of the shock and probably for a few more in the fleet as well. We all have one design rigs; they're all exactly the same. To really understand what caused Corum's rig was definitely at the forefront of Boris's mind, and he'll be having a think about that. In terms of you look at Alex and Thomas, they've both got new boats. They've done less miles, and although we have massively changed our boat this winter with the new foils, I think Boris is pretty confident now that he has a reliable boat, and something that's ready to take him around the Southern Ocean. And hopefully it does in the next few weeks. We'll really get a test as to how these new foilers perform in kind of the main chunk of the Vendée Globe, which is the Southern Ocean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, let's have a quick look at the tracker in the last 24 hours, and then we'll have a look at the forecast, and perhaps you can sort of take us through your thoughts in terms of where they were 24 hours ago. Obviously, none of them have moved that much further forward. Really, it's been pretty painful these last few days as the system's just been so complex in the way that they're trying to find a route through. But if I just run the forecast, run the tracker through, obviously the lead boats are making progress across the high, but just what's going on, just sort of where Boris is, and perhaps just behind him.
Yeah, this will have been a really tricky call for Boris, and kind of for the front pack especially, and for that second pack as well. But it's the routing all quite often wanted to see that dive down to the west and to the south, like Louis Burton and Initiatives are doing, and I think Hugo Boss looks like they're pointing that way as well. But it has to be a really good reason to want to actually sail all those extra miles. The course they're sailing is towards the east, and to go sail southwest is completely away from where you're trying to go. So I think, I mean, obviously Boris has really been put off by that, and he's trying to go for that direct route like the leaders at Pivia and Linked Out. But in the next 24 hours, we'll really have an answer as to which ways kind of paid a bit more, because we'll kind of get an idea of if Louis Berton and Initiatives are going to cross ahead of Boris and PRB as they kind of head towards the south as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the golden rule in this environment is, what's the fastest route south? And we in fact in 2004 we had a very big high pressure system, but not quite like this. And I ended up, because I was behind, thinking, well, I'll cut the corner, I'll sail across. And in the end, it paid just to get south, even if that meant going west of course. Alex, I think 2 or 3 Vendees ago, did a big dive to the southwest, and sailed some huge distance, and again sort of came back into the fold. So it'll certainly be interesting in the next few days. Let's have a quick look at the forecast, and perhaps that's the current situation. I've just sort of just drawn in arbitrary routes to show the sort of the 2 potential routes. But if we just fast forward to Thursday, so that's Thursday lunchtime, and then Friday lunchtime. Obviously, difficult to tell, but how confident do you feel that if you were in Boris's situation, what would you have done?
Very tricky. I would have been it's been I find it very tricky to keep sailing in that really light stuff that they are at the moment, almost kind of forcing themselves to be in that lighter stuff. And I think right now they're even sailing upwind angles in about 10 knots of wind. So it's pretty complicated. But if you look at the overall picture, that high pressure is going to move in very quickly to the east. So they're all doing a bit of a split. But I think in terms of it's not going to be the difference between hooking the next low or not. It's not going to make the biggest difference in the world. I think it might see 30 or 50 miles difference, but nothing more than that. So it's not the biggest risk, but it's always tricky. You always want to make the right call, and eventually they'll get into that good wind south of the high pressure, and we'll have an answer as to which way worked.
Okay, well, let's have a quick look at the routing. This was just from this morning, and I just I put Sam's position and Charlie's position in. Not super accurate in terms of polars, but it just gives us a little bit of an idea what to expect. There's no ice limit in this, so I'm not entirely sure Charlie will be able to go quite as deep as he'd like. He may have to put a few jibes in on that ice limit. But what's interesting is, as you say, from both situations, is they don't end up a whole weather system apart, and that's obviously normally the big fear when you you gamble with the strategy, that you end up falling back a weather system behind, and big differences in distance to go can open up. But it looks like I think there's perhaps a little gain for the boats behind, but they're at least on the same weather system.
Yeah, I think as well with that there's that low system that they hook into in the south, and one difference with these newer boats with the newer foils, you only really see the effect of the larger foils when the sea state is reasonable and the conditions are reasonable. So it gets to a point where you're in 30 plus knots, where even less than that, 25 knots, where it's really no benefit to have bigger foils. So I think the strategy is changing in that sense as well. They're not always looking for the most extreme conditions, which I think will have had an influence on some of the boats like Apivia and Linked Out. They all chose to sail through the center of that high, the shorter course, and hoping that there'll be some sort of more than 12 knots of wind to get the boat foiling, because they know that that's the conditions that the boat's really suited for. And once you get into proper Southern Ocean conditions, it becomes a lot harder to make the boats give those extra benefits from the foils and really get really high speeds.
And tell me a bit about Alex's boat. So my understanding with his foil setup is, he can get rid of his foils. He can pull them in further, perhaps than than Thomas and Charlie. Um, will that make a big difference in the south?
I wouldn't have said so, but I think the interesting thing with Alex's foils is the fact that is the shape of them really. It's they're these big C-shaped foils like on Alex and on Archaea Paprec. They seem to be a lot better for producing lift rather than righting moments. So it's a bit more beneficial in terms of sailing VMG angles, sailing downwind angles. You're trying to lift the boat up rather than produce righting moment. You don't really want that much righting moment downwind. So I think Alex, as he's always said, is he wants a very fast downwind boat, and that's exactly what he's gone for. So although he's had this setback, it could be interesting how it plays out in the south. But in terms of retracting the foils, I think that's only really beneficial in the super light winds. But apart from that, we'll have to, and obviously the windward foil trying to reduce the drag on that. But I don't think Charlie or Thomas on linked out will have too much worry about that.
Good. Well, fascinating catching up. Thanks so much for joining us. And it'd be really interesting to see how the next few days play out. Certainly, this time 4 years ago, I think they were going to be quicker to the Cape of Good Hope. So I don't think we're going to see any records broken this time round. But let's hope they all escape the clutches of this high and get on their way. Otherwise, we'll all be sat here in a week's time still. How are you going in the game, by the way? I know you're playing pretty competitive. I keep on seeing you popping up down to leeward on the game. You seem to have piled off to the west in your own strategy.
Yeah, I've kind of split away from Boris now, doing my own decisions. But no, I joined a little bit late because I was a bit preoccupied getting him off the start line. But after I did join in, it's always addictive to follow the race and then do your own strategy as well. But it's pretty complicated. I'm going quite well so far, but I think it's the same for the game. In the next 24 hours, we'll see who's going to pop out in front, who's made the right call of how much west to do.
You've been gaining play. I've been watching you gaining places for the last week or so. This last few days, I've just let it do its thing just to see what happens, and I don't think I've lost out at all. It's just you get sort of gains and losses really, but. All right, well, thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully further down track we'll catch up again. But in the meantime, good luck to Boris, and see you soon.
Great, thanks very much for having me, Conrad.
Cheers. So that was Will Harris. Fantastic to see the knowledge there from this top Figaro sailor, and obviously been spending a lot of time with Boris sailing the boat. On Friday, we're back with Mike Golding joining us. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.